Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Remote No Pressure podcast. We're so excited that you joined us for another week, another episode. This week is a little bit different. We're releasing this episode on a Wednesday. We don't normally do midweek episodes, but seriously, we have so much momentum going on right now. We're gonna release this one here midweek. Now, this episode is great because I don't know if you guys went and looked at and watched the fly fishing film tour this year, but the very last movie with the tarpon and all that, one of the guests is named Dylan Rose, Dylan Rose, and with a name like Dylan Rose, you know he's gonna play like saxophone or something, because that's just a jazz name. That's just awesome. And it's the truth. He does, actually. He's a fly fisherman, but he also played jazz in the Seattle scene, attended Berklee School of Music. Just a fascinating individual. Welcome to the podcast. Let's light the fire. Well, today on the Remote No Pressure podcast, we have Dylan Rose. Thank you very much for hanging out with us tonight, Dylan.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Now, before we get started, I wanted to ask you a few questions. You went to Berklee School of Music, correct?
Yes, I did. Yep, I went there for 4 years after high school.
Can you tell us what took you there and how'd you end up going to Berklee?
Yeah, well, I started music in high school, actually, and started playing in the band there at my high school in northern Seattle, and eventually kind of migrated towards jazz band and playing the sax, and who knew I was actually pretty good at it at that time. Not anymore, but at that time. And really, fell in love with playing, and more than that, fell in love with jazz and old school jazz, and played in my band and ended up, doing a lot of solo work in the band and kind of being featured, and eventually by the end of high school, it kind of ended up what I would call a big fish in a little pond in the jazz scene there. And so I just kept with it. And when I was applying to schools, a couple music-centric schools were also in the mix, ended up getting into Berklee in Boston on a kind of jazz partial scholarship. And so then at 17, in the fall of that summer, I moved out to Boston and started what would be kind of a short-term music career before fly fishing took over. Ended up being there for 4 years.
Can you tell us a little bit about how fly fishing took over?
Yeah, well, it's certainly a long story. Fly fishing for me was something that came about after growing up and being kind of a spin fishing kid / bait fishing kid with my brother and my parents in the San Juan Islands. They had a little boat, and I was fishing before I could even walk at that time, but it was a lot of times with piling worms and bait and fishing for ratfish and all kinds of stuff like that, skate, dogfish, and rock cod in the salt. But then I'd say really when I was about 16 or 17, started fishing with my friend Chris and his dad, and they introduced me to fly fishing, and I caught a juvenile steelhead smolt on a dry fly in the Stillaguamish River. And I think the moment when I saw that fish come up and eat the fly on the surface, something definitely changed in me, and I was kind of locked in ever since then. And so ended up in a fly shop working in the summers, and then when I got into Berklee, did my school stuff back east, and when I would come home, work at the fly shop, and that kind of continued through school, and then even after I got back from school. So I was, wasn't quite sure whether I was going to be a fly fishing musician or a musician that fly fished, but ended up amazingly finding common ground between both realms pretty easily.
Can you tell us about gigging all night and guiding in the morning?
Yeah, I'd like to formally apologize to any and all clients that I guided after being in a bar until 2 o'clock playing music. It was not good most days, but I managed to get through it. I would, when I was back from school, we would have various gigs playing with my friends, and in those days, you'd be in a bar playing, and in Seattle there wasn't the no smoking ban, so I would literally be in a bar, blowing my brains out until 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning, and essentially getting paid in free beer, and then go home, try and get a couple hours of sleep, try and sober up, take a shower, go drive downtown and pick up my clients at 7 in the morning, and then go fishing for 8 to 10 hours, as well as battling Seattle traffic while doing so. And so it just was not sustainable. At the time I'm like 23 or 22 years old doing it, and I thought it was the greatest life ever. But you get married and realize that you actually need money to survive, and that being mediocre at both things, guiding and music, something had to give. And so music kind of certainly gave way to fishing and guiding.
Yeah, you said earlier that there were a lot of similarities between the two worlds. Can you go into that a little bit for us, Dylan?
Yeah, I'm passionate about things that are impossible to master, it seems like. And to me, fly fishing is one of those things, and music is one of those things. And I think the other big part of it is just the opportunity to be creative. And I've been drawn to those types of things in my life, since I was a little kid, and anything that would allow me to to create interesting things. And what drew me to jazz, was really the improvisation, and being in a crowded room with a bunch of people staring at you, having a horn in your hand and creating something musically interesting on the fly, was, a real challenge. And I loved it, and I loved the excitement of it. And I pursued everything it took to be good at it. And fly fishing was kind of the same thing. I see a lot of the creativity there, to be presenting the fish in different ways, or to fish a different area that somebody hasn't, that you think maybe is new to you, or and certainly in tying flies, the creativity is, and the avenue to be creative is just massive, even in today's world. And the similarities there are probably even more striking, because in improvisation there are all these melodic tools that the masters have sort of put down on records for you to study. And in fly tying, the tools and the tricks of the trade are all there kind of before you. And the creative part is really, putting those things together and assembling the components of what you think is cool into something unique and special, and is your own brand. And so, yeah, there's a ton of similarities really with everything and every part of it.
The deeper I get into this fly fishing world, the more creative people I find. I mean, we've had Bob White on the podcast, who's an amazing,
for sure,
amazing painter. We've had A.D. Maddox. We've had some really great artists on
absolutely
our podcast, and it just seems like they just go hand in hand. It's the craziest thing.
Yeah, no, it's definitely true. I was fortunate enough this year to get to fish with Jeff Currier, and we're sitting in an airport, and one of my buddies' Patagonia backpacks is there in the airport as we're getting ready to get on this flight. And the next thing I know, Currier's got a black Sharpie out, and he's just drawing the most insane picture of a tarpon on our friend's backpack, down to the scale and the eyeball and the proportions and the fins. And, you just realize, what talent is out there. And I think fly fishing tends to draw really interesting, talented people. And that's probably, as you get older in the sport and certainly the industry, it's the people that you meet along the way that become in some ways more interesting than actually just the mechanical ability of putting a fish on a hook. So I always look for those opportunities to get to know those people.
Yeah, we had Rick Pope, the owner of TFO. We interviewed him, and we asked him, what's your number one accomplishment in life? And he said, there was a lot of kudos, and there's money and all this other stuff, but what he valued most was the friends that he's met along the way. For sure.
Yeah. And I would echo that, I think, to a great degree. The friends that I make and the connections I make on the water are probably the most important aspect of the whole thing for me. And I think that happens after you've caught a lot of fish and you've been around a little bit, and you're getting through that learning curve of what it is to just functionally go fishing. And when you look back, when I look back at my fishing life, I think it's the people that I remember and the times and the good times that I remember most over the actual fish that I caught. And I think that speaks to the fact that has a bigger impact on me. And luckily in this job, I'm starting to get to the point where I'm making those relationships, meeting those people in other countries now, and looking back and remembering those guides and remembering the people that I spend time with in Mexico or in Belize or Christmas Island. And the people are what really stand out the most, and those relationships I value the most.
Now, the company you work for now recently opened up a trip to Cuba, and we can get into what you do in a minute. But what I wanted to ask is, Cuba, Venezuela, Mexico, I mean, there's a lot of countries you guys go to that are very impoverished. And
Yep.
when you go to these countries and you meet another angler, whether he is living in poverty or he's wealthy, do you see a lot of the same traits even across cultures within the fly fishing community?
Yeah, I think that there's an appreciation of the natural environment around them, and that would be one thing. I think that's what's striking about some of those things culturally, and I think a lot of people that travel will tell you this is one of the reasons why they travel. But consider a place like Christmas Island, where you've got a 5,000 to 7,000 person population on this, remote raised coral atoll in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. And you've got an environment that's, I'd say, sub-third, fourth world, fifth world at best. People are living there in cinder block huts with corrugated metal tin roofs and a pig tied to a palm tree, by its back leg. And you land there to go fishing, coming from the world we come from. And the first thing you realize is that these people aren't walking around destitute. They're some of the happiest people that you'll ever meet in your life, with the biggest, brightest, whitest smiles for you, and they don't even know you, and yeah, they go through hard times like we all do, but in general, they're happy, and they're really excited to show you their backyard, and how they live, because they know where you're coming from is so starkly different. But it is a striking thing to go to a place like that and realize that, these people are truly happy with so absolutely little compared to what we have. And that's striking and I think poignant when you kind of first start coming into contact with it.
One of the things I noticed, Dylan, about your website with your bio, you start off being extremely thankful for your wife and your daughter. I think that your spirit of gratitude and being thankful goes a long way, and I really appreciate that. And I think too, no matter what state we're living in, when we have a heart of gratitude, it makes a big difference.
Absolutely, yeah, and I think it comes from getting a little bit older, and I think it comes from, quite honestly, getting beaten down by life, and in certain ways as you grow older and navigate, life and death and relationships changing and things like that. And, I think that it humbles you. And I think fly fishing is the great humbling device, for people. And if you've spent any time fishing, there's days where you're out there getting humbled. And I think for people like myself that have tried to make a career in fly fishing, being humbled is something that can happen daily, especially as you're trying to, get paid to live a fly fishing life. And so I think that's what comes down to. And, I think about my greatest accomplishments, and probably it is my relationship with my wife. And we've been together since high school, and I've got this beautiful 8-month-old daughter, and fly fishing is my career. It's my first passion, but it pales into comparison to her and my relationship with her, and now this beautiful little kid that we brought into the world. So yeah, I'm grateful for it. I'm really grateful that this industry has given me the ability to have a career, because it hasn't been easy. And you go from guiding to repping to e-commerce to hosting trips, and to now working for an international booking agency. And it's a long it's kind of a long path and seeing different avenues of the industry. And I think when you look back, I'm almost 40 and I've been doing it since I was really 17 in the fly shop. And so look back at how fast that went by and go, man, I've been actually employed in fly fishing. It's pretty remarkable to me, and I'm eternally thankful for it, for sure.
You had mentioned life beating you up. Would you care to share an experience when life really beat you up and how fly fishing helped you through that, Dylan?
Yeah, I think I alluded to it, earlier. I think that, I think that mostly for me it's been career-wise, although there's kind of personal family stuff in there as well. But, I think when 2008 hit and I was repping with John Kovich up in the Seattle area for Washington, Oregon, Alaska, we started seeing all of these fly shops just going under with the quote unquote Great Recession, and this was something in the news that we were hearing about, and, the subprime housing market was demolishing our economy and everything like that. And the reality manifests itself in the industry I was employed in, and that was watching numerous fly shops, some of them very successful with very smart, talented people at the helm, just dropping like flies. And it cost me my job, essentially. And it wasn't anybody's fault. It was just the nature of a downturn in the business. And I think whenever those times happened, I went back to guiding. And you've done a podcast with Dave McCoy up in Seattle, and he's who got me started into guiding, and we're longtime friends and have been at this game, together up in Seattle for a long time. But, going back to guiding was kind of that safety net for me, and calling up Dave and just be like, hey man, I need some trips. I gotta patch this together, and luckily, he always was there to kind of stick by me and pass those trips on, do the best I could. But yeah, I think, career-wise, being laid off in multiple jobs, having stuff happen to you where you can't be employed anymore for no fault of your own, and then just trying to pick up and find another way to survive and keep at it and make a living at fly fishing without sort of bailing onto another thing is, it takes perseverance for sure.
Yeah, I was a mortgage banker when it all hit the fan, and I lost my job as well.
Absolutely, there's a lot of us. Yeah, it was nutty. It was certainly a nutty time, and thankfully, you've seen that those shops that did survive that time frame are, in some cases bigger and stronger and better than they were before, and it speaks to the resiliency of the fishing life and being a shop owner and sticking it out.
I totally agree with you. And it's funny because, I lost my job and then I had to kind of recreate myself in the financial world and ended up getting out of that because it's just crazy. It just wasn't my cup of tea, but I totally know what it's like. I mean, what year how old are you, if you don't mind me asking, Dylan?
I'm almost 39.
Oh, almost 39.
Yeah.
So like when we got out of college, we had this like brief time of a career.
Yeah.
And then lost it. So, right. Like my wife and I, we were building, Yeah. And that went on. It wasn't like a 2-day, like, the market crash, it was like years and years and years. It was a pretty difficult time.
For sure.
Yeah.
It was a really hard time. And, I had a actual, not a figurative crash, but a literal crash because I was working for a seaplane charter company sort of before I took the repping job and before the housing crisis and everything else hit. And we were running trips from Seattle up to Vancouver Island and literally had a plane crash. And
oh my gosh.
That was, life-changing in and of itself, being, hounded by the media and in Seattle and, just having the fallout from that and it inevitably ending up with another career change, and it was, I'm going back to guiding, and then, thankfully got a call from John Kovich to come rep with him. And at that time it was a real lifesaver and yeah, it was just, it seemed like for a while there was one thing after the other. And I'm super, humbled by that. As I said before, I feel lucky to still be here in the industry now with, a fantastic company and a really exciting space to be in the industry. And so it's, it speaks to, being down, but never being out and getting back up,
Right.
and, I think that's a big key component to making it. So
Yeah, never stopping. You got to keep moving forward. I love it, Dion. I love what you're doing, man. So tell us a little bit about what you do now.
So I work for Flywater Travel. We're based in Ashland, Oregon. There's 10 of us here full time. Company's been around for almost 2 decades, and we're an international booking agency. So we specialize in fly fishing. We send anglers all over the world. Our goal is to send them to the right spot at the right time of year with the right gear, and that's what we focus on doing. I'm lucky enough to be the saltwater guy around here, so I get to focus on Mexico, Belize, Venezuela, Cuba, Bahamas, and Christmas Island. And so I travel in those zones extensively every year and become familiar with all the operations we represent there. And I've got a great base of clientele that call me up and let me help them go fishing. And so when I'm not in the office here talking fishing, I'm out traveling internationally and getting to explore some of these waters. We've been doing it for about almost 7 years now.
Wow. And tell us, I don't know if you have any off the cuff, but can you tell us a couple stories? I mean, can you tell us about your first trip to Cuba and how that went, how that happened?
Sure, absolutely. Well, Cuba has been a sort of lusted after location for American anglers for 50 years probably. Sure. And anglers have gone before things sort of opened up in the latter part of the Obama era. Anglers were going, but they were essentially doing that illegally. You would fly into Mexico, you'd fly into Cuba, you go do your trip. Well, let me back up. You'd fly into Cuba, and then when you were at customs, they'd typically ask you if you want your passport stamped with the Cuban passport insignia. And people were trained to say, no, I don't want you to stamp my passport because I'm coming in under the cover of darkness. And so you go do your fishing trip, and then you bail out and hope that you don't get a letter in 6 months from the United States Treasury Department, asking you to pay $15,000. So that was how things were done. Several years ago, like I said, as things kind of were opening up with Obama era politics toward the end of his term, there was several regulations that changed just enough to allow anglers to go completely legally. And so that was, a huge turning point for me in this business because it was, a real boom. It was, like a gold rush for everybody involved, because anglers just were thirsting to go. And the Cuban outfitters, responded by just completely jacking prices up for these trips, and anglers still continued to go. And I think the reason why is because these fisheries are pristine, and you can say what you want about Castro and his regime and the country, but one thing that he did do was really preserve his natural resources. And I think mainly selfishly it was because he wanted to go dive them and fish them and have them be his personal playgrounds. Mm-hmm. And so these areas are remote. They're absolutely pristine, and they have fantastic fishing. My first trip was in 2015, and we led a group of about 10 anglers to go cruise on the North Coast, which last year got really hammered by Hurricane Irma. And its future at this point in the near term is kind of a little bit in doubt. Anglers are booking now and starting to kind of go back. But I think that was the biggest impression I got was just that, wow, this is a fishery that literally looks like it has not been touched. So there's no prop scars on the flats, and the fish are responsive, and you can tell they haven't seen anybody, in some places maybe for quite a while. And so yeah, that was probably the biggest thing, and I guess I should back up a little bit. It's not that nobody was fishing these areas, because the Canadians, South Americans, Europeans, they'd been fishing Cuba for decades before Americans ever got there. So it wasn't that, that these areas were completely untouched. It was just that, the Americans were late to the party, and that the Cubans did and are doing a phenomenal job of keeping these areas, pristine and not ruining them. And, so, from the fishing aspect, that was probably the biggest thing, was just like I said, the quality of the environment. And then, the next big thing is Havana, which is, just a good time. If you can't have fun in Havana, there's no place in the world you can have a good time. You've got just, a very, beautiful, intelligent population of people that have nothing, kind of getting back to what we talked about before. They have nothing, but they're in many ways, downtrodden, but at the same time happy for their family and for what they do have, and their friends and then their friendships. And, they're not sitting inside their little tiny, apartment watching TV all night long. They're outside on the Malecon, hanging out with their friends, blaster, banging on bongos, smoking and making out with their girlfriends. So it was, it's just a great scene and a great vibe to be in. And if you go to if you go there, my advice is just to cut loose and let yourself dance the Congo on the street, So it's a phenomenal place to go and visit, and highly recommend it.
Have you ever had anything crazy happen on a trip?
Yeah. I mean, there's always varying levels of crazy, whether it's on an airplane or whether it's just, traveling. I think on one of my early trips here at Flywater, I became, really close to being lunch for a huge bull shark that I didn't know was behind me. And that was probably the craziest thing in terms of of adrenaline spikage. That's probably the biggest thing.
Can you tell us about that? What happened?
Well, we were in Ascension Bay. It was one of my first trips there, and I had caught a Jack Crevalle that was probably 8 pounds, and they fight super hard. And I had caught it on my bonefish rig because I was bonefishing at the time, and peeled off line and went way out, and I'm fighting it, and I'm trying to pull it back in, and I'm putting the screws to it to land it, and I jump in the water with the junior guide, because there at Pescamaya they run two guides. So me and the junior guide jumped out, landed the fish, and it's just squawking. Sometimes these jacks make this like squawking sound. It's just rop, 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 rop. And, in hindsight, looking back, it's just ringing the dinner bell, essentially, when it's in the water squawking like that.
Uh-huh.
And so we were landing the fish, and I was trying to get the egotistical hero shot of my Jack Crevalle. And the junior guide is there with the camera, and he's taking a picture of it, and I can actually send you the photo.
Yeah.
And the next thing I know, the senior guide's on the platform saying, "Hey guys, you might want to get back in the boat." And he points the pole kind of out behind me, and I don't really see anything, but I see Rosendo, the junior guide, literally jump out of the water and up onto the gunnel of the boat. And my camera's going crashing down into the boat, and I sort of just stand up, and this huge wash of water kind of hits me and hits my leg, and it pushed this bow wake of water, and I think I spooked it, because it got close to where the fish was and saw me, and then just turned and swam away. And I, of course, jumped into the boat after that happened, which was far too late. It would have been totally munched prior to that. And then, after things kind of settled down, we collected ourselves. The senior guide just told us that it was about an 11-foot, bull shark that had snuck up on us while we were trying to take a picture of this fish. So,
wow.
So that was that.
Wow. Well, Dylan, and by the way, with a name like Dylan Rose, that's the perfect stage name for a saxophone player.
Yeah.
Isn't that the coolest name?
If able to pull it off, that would have worked.
Dylan Rose. Yeah, that's awesome. I love it. If people want to get in touch with you or check out your website or where you work, how would they do that, Dylan?
It's easy. It's just Dylan at flywatertravel.com. Spell my name Dylan at flywatertravel.com. And that's the company website as well, flywatertravel.com. Then I've got just a kind of a photo site that I like to share images on. It's called roseimedia.com. So
I'll put the links up on our blog as well so people can find you.
Perfect.
And we really appreciate you hanging out with us. Thank you very much.
Absolutely. I appreciate the time and the opportunity.
Well, thank you, Dylan, and thank you for joining us this week for another episode of the Remote No Pressure Podcast. Be sure to check out our website at remotenopressure.com. Sign up for our mailing list. Follow us on Facebook, Instagram. We're so glad that you're part of this community. And until next time, go fishing.